Hello friends, welcome to JavaEE JSP tutorial. In this video, we are going to see how to use JSF in JSP pages. So JSF stands for Java Server Faces. So it's simply a JavaEE specification, like a JavaEE specification for JSP and Servlet. JSF is one more specification, and this specification helps in component based rendering of the web application. So the servlet and JSP can build rich UIs, but it requires more coding. So in our previous examples, we saw how we used JSP scriptlets, custom tags, all those stuff to render the UI component for the web application. So likewise, in JSF also, you can build the rich UI based on the built-in components. Here, if you see in JSP also, we can do build rich UIs, but it may require more coding, and with the JSF, you can do that with less coding, because we may end up using the built-in components. I mean, built-in components in the sense the components are built in as part of this JSF specification itself. So our demo uses Wildfly 10x, and it supports JSF specification. So if you use older version of a Wildfly or JBoss flavor, then you have to check their documentation to know the version supports the JSF. So likewise, you can check JSF specification supported for other vendor also. Say for example, if you are picking Tomcat, then you have to check whether Tomcat supports the JSF specification. Same goes for WebLogic and other vendors. So most probably WebLogic will support, and it also depends on the version, which version you are using. Since as already quoted here, Wildfly supports JSF, we no need to refer any jar file because it is built in with the vendor itself. So the vendor runtime provides support for the JSF. That means when you install the Wildfly, it will deploy the required jar files. So you no need to refer any jar file when you are creating the projects. So JSF API provides a servlet to process user input. So actually all the HTTP request goes to this particular servlet, which is provided by the JSF. So which will perform some user processing, and it can even decide the control flow. So the servlet is known as Faces servlet. So the JSF operates on this special servlet called Faces servlet. So this entry will be provided in our web.xml. So Faces servlet entry, we can find it in the web XML. That means by looking at the web XML, you can know which how it is referring the Faces servlet. So definitely the web XML will contain the mapping point. If we are not using annotation, then definitely for Faces servlet we won't use any annotation. So the entry will be available here in the web.xml file. and when URL contains faces, it will redirect it to the faces servlet, and from faces servlet the call will be redirected to, or the work will be delegated to a different file. So it can be a JSP file or some other servlet. So from browser, let us assume that HTTP request goes out to the server, and the server will have a faces servlet, and this servlet is provided by the JSF API. So it will be part of the JSF API, and then this faces servlet will do the all user processing. Then it will redirect the call to some other file which is part of the URL, say abc.jsp, some other servlet, and some JSP. So definitely the URL will have HTTP. Let's say this is the machine name and some project name. Then you will see something called faces here. Then suppose if we pick this, then URL will have abc.jsp. So the user, whatever user submits here, that goes to faces servlet, because the faces servlet, based on this URL pattern. So in URL pattern we say faces. If you see here HTTP faces, so the URL contains faces, so the request is processed by the faces servlet. So after processing this, it knows that there is some JSP file, and the processed information will be sent to the JSP file. So in JSP file we will end up using the JSF tags. So here in this video we will see a simple example that will perform the JSF processing. So what we will do, the JSF processing will take place in two phases. Let's say this is the phase 1. So we call this as a model phase, and then comes the rendering phase. So what happens in model phase, we read the user input, and if we have any processing we will do that processing, and if we want to store it here somewhere, we will do that also. We, in the sense, the model JSF model phase will perform these actions. It reads whatever is submitted, then it performs the processing of the information which was read from the browser. Then if the information read needs to be stored somewhere in Bean or database, so those stuff also carried out. Then in a rendering phase, if something needs to be pushed to the browser session, that will be done, or we can do some output operation. So that's why there are two phases here. Model phase reads the input, and then rendering phase provides some output based on this processing. All right, now we will write a simple example that explains these two phases, model as well as rendering phase. So if you see here, we have a view. So we already know about the tag library stuff, and we even wrote our custom library. So if you see this so this is part of the tag library, and this time we use the JSF specific tag. So F is one of the JSF specific tag, and H is also a JSF specific tag. So that means we refer different part of the JSF with the F and H. So this one is for HTML simulation, and similarly F also. So when we go to the demo, that time you will clearly see how the tag lib entries are made by our Eclipse IDE itself. So here view represents the rendering element in the browser. Then inside view we have the form, and if you see, this is not HTML form, and we just specify a JSF tag. Since we state h colon form, this form belongs to the JSF. That means at runtime JSF will process this tag, and ultimately it will end up providing a HTML style of a form with the other attributes expanded. So here what you see, you just see a h form. So this is how we minimize the code, and when we go to demo, that time we will explore more about this. Then inside the form, if you see, we are using the h input text. So this h input text is again a JSF tag, and we provide a number. That means the attribute is ID. So this is one attribute. This is the tag. Input text is the tag that comes from the JSF specification, and the attribute what we are using is the ID, number, then value. And if you see, this is the JSF expression. So when we learned JSTL, that time we saw JSTL tags expects dollar, curly braces, then some variable, and end curly braces. JSF, if you see, this dollar got changed into hash. Then same syntax. So here what we do, str number, and we are specifying a value. So we already talked about the model space, then rendering space. We will come to this once again after we explored the code. So for now you can see hash, open curly braces, str number. That's what we specified here. So type a 2-digit number, then we specify this with the JSF tag inside the JSF form, and render a HTML submit button. So this is nothing but a HTML input text. We will see that soon. Here we use the JSF tag h input text, h command button, and at runtime you can see how this get translated into the HTML form field elements. So here h command button is the tag, then value attribute we are specifying send. Then here we are using the output text. So this will not get translated into any HTML tag, but this will provide some output, or this entire tag will get replaced by some output. So what happens here, we specify value equal to $str number. Here we do write, and here we are reading it. Now let us do some numbering here. So let us state this one as 1. So this is just a submit button. Let us leave that, and this one as 2. Now let's say that this code presents in some file called a.jsp. So this will be in the server side. When user browses, in the URL pattern they will provide faces, then a.jsp. So ultimately user is trying to browse this JSP file, and the JSP file contains the URL pattern. In the URL pattern it has faces. So what happens when user submits this, or in the address bar, once they type this and hit enter, the request goes to the server, and first it goes to the servlet. So the servlet is a faces servlet provided by the JSF API, and the faces servlet, if you see, first it will go on the model phase. So in the model phase it reads the number. So when user first time when they are browsing it, so they are requesting a.jsp, and it contains the URL pattern faces. So the flow goes like this. First it goes through faces servlet, and the faces servlet will perform all the tag replacement. So from faces servlet we go to the JSP file, and in the JSP, if you see, we have the tag processing. So the tag processing will taken care by the faces servlet, and faces servlet will replace this as a input text box. So we will get HTML input, then we get a submit button. So all these are translated into the HTML tag. Then here we won't read anything. So if you see here, this is the input text, right? And there is a variable associated with it. So at this stage we don't have any variable. Why? Because this is the first time the user is browsing to this a.jsp. So type a two-digit number, so that text will get printed. After that user will see a text box, and this text box is associated with some variable str number, so we can call this as 1. Then we have a command button, send. After that output text, and if you see, the value 1 is not yet assigned any value. That means when we are reading something here, we doesn't get anything when the form is rendered for the first time. So during the model phase it doesn't read anything from this str number. Why? Because the str number is empty since the form is displayed for the first time. Then in the rendering phase it won't render anything because there is nothing in str number. So when the form is presented, it will be presented like this. Now let us say user is pressing this send button. So once again the request goes to the server and comes back. So this time when the request goes to the server for the second time, during the model phase it will read the number. Let's say before pressing the send button, user typed something called 10 here, then they pressed send, and when they are sending it, the entire form will be submitted to a.jsp. that we will see soon when we are going to the demo. Why? Because the H form will get expanded to the HTML form, and the action takes place on the same file, and we will see that when we go to demo. So user typed 10 and they clicked send. Once again they come here, faces a.jsp, that means faces servlet will do the processing, then it renders the JSP file. So when faces servlet process this second time, during the model phase it will read the str number. Then it reads, in the sense here it reads it from the HTML form and stores that internally in the str number. Then during the output phase, whatever data, so here it stores that str number internally, then here it is reading it. At 2 we are reading the content of 1, so that's what get printed here. So you entered, here we will get you entered and you will get 10. So let me explain this once again. When user typed this URL, the code will run for the first time. When it is running for the first time, the variable will be associated with the input text. So when the form is rendered for the first time, we get input text. First we will see this text, type a 2-digit number, then we will see input text. After that we will see a submit button for send, or because this is command button and it will be replaced as a submit button at runtime. Then we will get you entered, and when we are reading we won't get anything, so this 10 will not be displayed for the first time. Then user types 10 here, then they click send, and the content will be again submitted to the same file, say a.jsp. Now it runs for the second time. The same form will run for the second time. This time the input text, so it will read value from the form. Here if you see, the value 10 is read and stored inside the str number in the JSF context. Then this you entered will get printed. Here we go into the rendering phase. So up to this we can say modeling phase. It does reading all those stuff. Since here we are seeing the output, this will go on a rendering phase and outputs the content in str number. So this is the simple example we want to create to understand a model and the rendering phase, and how the JSF tags get replaced into HTML tags. Now it's a demo time. So here we are seeing a JSP example. Now we will create a new web application, dynamic web project. So that's the project name we are giving, dynamic web application project. Let's take target runtime while fly. So here we will go for custom, or once you click modify, it goes to custom. Here we will pick Java server phases. Version 2.2 is okay. And if you see here, it got changed to custom. So this is the specification we are giving, dynamic web project. Then from the configuration, we included the Java server phases here. Now we will click next. So we don't want to configure anything here. Click next. So we can actually go for generate web.xml deployment descriptor. Then click next. And if you see here, library provided by target runtime. So in the PowerPoint slide, we told that Wildfly provides the runtime for a JSF implementation library. So we just picked this. Or if you want to use a separate JSF library, then you can go for user library. Here we will stick with whatever that comes with the Wildfly library provided by target runtime. Target runtime here is Wildfly, and the Wildfly vendor will supply the JSF jar files for you. Then configure JSF servlet in a deployment descriptor. So make sure this option is checked. And here if you want to change the XML file name, you can change, but this is the standard, so we can accept the same name. And if you see URL mapping pattern faces.star, that means the URL will contain this faces keyword, and if the URL contains this keyword, then the servlet faces servlet will process the user input. So, and you can see we already told it is provided by the target runtime, and the runtime location you can see here: JavaX, faces, web app, faces servlet. So who will provide this? The Wildfly will provide this. Suppose if you configured Glassfish here or WebLogic here, and if you choose library provided by target runtime, then the same faces servlet, this implementation is provided by a different runtime. That means if we chose WebLogic, then WebLogic runtime will provide this faces servlet. All right, now that's all here. We will click finish. So it created a project called JSF intro, and if we go to web content, this is the web XML, and in the web XML you can see servlet mapping, faces servlet, URL pattern, faces, and it can be anything after that. So if URL contains faces, after that a star, JSP or some other servlet, whatever it is. Since the URL pattern contains faces, it goes to the servlet name faces servlet, and here is the faces servlet name faces servlet. That's how we are mapping servlet mapping, faces servlet, URL pattern, faces.star. That means if URL contains this faces keyword followed by some other URL name, then go to faces servlet. So that's what here in the as part of a mapping we are specifying. So now the middleware will search for the servlet. So here is the servlet section, and in servlet we have a faces servlet, and it knows where this servlet exists, and the request goes to this faces servlet first. So that's what here in the web.xml, and in faces config, so I just double clicked it, and we will go to source, and in faces config, if you see, this is the entry which was initially made by the IDE itself. So we don't need to worry about all this XML namespace which is provided by the Wildfly itself. All right, now we will create a new JSP file. So we will call this as JSF page 1, then click next. So in our previous example, when we used JSP examples, we used a new JSP file. This time we will choose a different template, new Java server faces page, JSF page. And if you see in the description, JSP with HTML markup and default view setup. So this is what view setup, and these tag lib references are added for us. And if you see F, H and prefix, if you see, this is core part F and H part is HTML part. Okay, let's click finish. So do not worry about these errors. Cannot find a tag library, so do not worry about it, because it is provided by the runtime itself, and we can see all this stuff will work when we are running the application. So by default we have F view, which is coming from JSF core itself. So as already explained in the slide, inside this view we create our form, and if you see here, we are using the H prefix, then we are using the form. That means it's not a direct HTML form. Since we use this form tag from this tag lib prefix, then this HTML stuff is provided by the JSF. By this time you may have a good idea about how this tag lib works. Why? Because we even created our own tag lib and we used all this prefix and URI stuff. So now you may have an idea of how all this stuff will work together. So if you see here, JSF, they have some URI mapped in the TLD file or in their specification, and inside they may define a tag called form. Similarly, they may define the input text. So this is one tag, command button is one tag, output text, it will be one tag. All right, now we will render this so that you will get more picture. So these stuffs are already explained in our slide. So let's remove this and we will add JSF intro. Now we will start our server. Okay, Wildfly server is started. Now we say run on server. You can try this same example with a different vendor in the sense Glassfish or WebLogic server. Let's copy this. And you can see here, type a 2-digit number, text box, then a command button, you entered. So type a 2-digit number and you can see, type a 2-digit number, then h input text. So this is the input text, then command button send is displayed, and here if you see you entered is displayed, and here if you see you entered is displayed, and output text, it doesn't output anything because we are rendering for the first time. And we will go to the page source now. I think it will be better to use Internet Explorer so that view source will get displayed in the bottom. So now we asked for the specific URL, and you can see the URL contains faces. Even though we requested for JSF page 1, here when we directly run it, it included the faces. So in the URL we are including so this is the machine name, JSF intro is our project name, faces that we include in the URL, then we place a GET request for the JSF page 1, then we hit enter. And if you see, when the servlet is processing this and the tags are replaced into the HTML format. So first type a 2-digit number, it just appears as it is. Then if you see this H input text, here you can see input, then type is text. That means it's a normal HTML tag, right? H input, type is text, then a name and IDs are given. So ID here we gave ID number, and if you see the JSF is, the JSF faces servlet is processing it and includes the ID number here. Similarly, the second one is send, and this send is H command button, and if you see input, type is submit, and name it takes from whatever. Here we doesn't provide any name, so it automatically provided a name. That means the JSF automatically provided a name, and value is send. Here we specified value is send, and this H colon command button is replaced as a input type text. So this is the HTML element, this is the JSF element. JSF element is transformed to a HTML submit button. Then H1 you entered, the same stuff is appearing here. And finally we have a H output text, and if you see it's a input for type hidden. That's how the JSF is replacing it, right? And this H form, if you see JSF form is replaced as a HTML form. It provided a ID, it provided a name, it in the sense the JSF runtime. Method is post, and the action, if you see, it takes place on the same URL. JSF intro faces JSF page 1.jsp. Alright, now we will type some number here, 15, and we will click send. And if you see 15 is printed here. Now you can see both the rendering phase here. So now you can see both the execution phase here, model phase. In the model phase, the 15 is transferred into this value str number, and internally if you see the hidden field come into picture, so the content will get stored. But here as a JSF tag, you can remember it as like this. Here the data will be read model phase, then here it is a rendering phase. So as part of the rendering phase, here whatever content we read, that will get stored, that will get displayed here. So 15, and if you see here we place the 15. So now if I type 30 here, and when I click send, as part of the model phase, the content will get read and it will get stored internally inside a string, and then through the h output tag, the value internally cached will get read and displayed. Alright, so now it may give you an idea of how JSF works. In the next video, we will see how to use managed bean to transfer the rendering stuff. The model stuff in the sense that's the first phase. Content read from the HTML form will get stored into the managed bean. Then from managed bean, we will read the content and output it. That we will do in the next video. So that's all here. We will stop the server. Thank you for watching. Bye.